I think another thing, I discussed the move to cities and how that has transformed the way that we look at the world, so that we begin to think that we're in charge and that we're different. We are living through a time of unbelievable accessibility of information. And a lot of shallow thinkers think the information superhighway is the greatest thing going. I happen to absolutely disagree. The problem we face today is, for most people in the world, we're overloaded with information. We have no idea what the heck to make of it all. When I give a lecture on global warming, there's always a smart ass at the back that gets up and says, you're full of baloney, we're going into global cooling. We should be burning more fossil fuel. And when I say, well, why do you say that? They'll say, well, I found a website. And when I say, well, did you see who made that website? It goes, duh. Well, I didn't think about that. Chances are overwhelming it was created by the auto industry or a fossil fuel company. So you can find a website for anything you want. There's a Flat Earth Society with a Flat Earth website. Want to find that? There's a website for Bermuda Triangles, pyramid power. Women have been raped by UFO, people from outer space, and had babies. There's a website for that. You can find anything. A few years ago, I gave a talk in Toronto. Kid came down at the end and said, well, what do you think about spontaneous combustion? And I said, well, I know that oily rags in garages burst into flame. No, he said, I'm talking about people. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we're made of all kinds of molecules that burn, you know, hair and fingernails and sugar and fat and skin and all that stuff. With 6.4 billion people, it makes sense that at any given moment, this tiny fraction will reach a physiological state such that they burst into flames and burn up. And I said, well, gee, I'm a biologist, and that doesn't make much sense to me. But that very day, I was going through the Toronto airport, looked in the bookstore, there was a book called Spontaneous Combustion. And when you look at it, there are pictures. There's a pile of ashes, Mrs. Smith in Burnaby, BC. Honest. And the amazing thing is, if you read the book, spontaneous combustion never happens when someone else is in the room. It's always, I opened the door and there was my wife. Well, but because there's a book, people feel free to say, well, I mean, I read it, you know, or I saw it on TV. Yeah, but did you see it on The Nature of Things, or did you see it on That's Incredible? Well, I don't remember. So we're overwhelmed with information. And the process of feeding us information also shatters the world. All you have to do is pick up a Globe and Mail. Don't read the National Post, it's crap. Anyway, but read the Globe and Mail, and on a single day, you may find an article about hurricanes in the Caribbean, floods in Bangladesh, a drought in Africa, and forest fires in northern Alberta. And they're all reported as if they've got nothing to do with each other. So in the process, again, that shatters the world, because all we do is we look at the world through these lenses of focusing on little bits and pieces. I have to admit, I'm hooked on the 6 o'clock evening news on CBC Radio. But in a half-hour CBC radio newscast, you may get up 15 to 20 items in a half hour, which means that reports will vary between 15 and 90 seconds. When the radio announcer comes on and says, and tonight we bring you an in-depth report, he's talking about a 2-minute report. So we get reports coming from all over the world. No one tells us why this is a bit of news. No one tells us, we don't get any sense of the context within which this news report is set. What was the history that led up to this? And there's certainly no indication of what you can do about it anyway. So what our news does, again, is it just shatters the world into bits and pieces, and we no longer see the connections. I think the greatest shatterer of the world, though, is this thing that we are now all told to bow down before, called the economy. I have found over in the last few years that when I give talks on the environment, I'm spending more and more of my time talking about economics. I've never had a course in economics. I just use common sense. But I thought, gee, you know, maybe it'd be good if I could, because economists talk in a way that really impresses you, you know. And I thought if I could use the same words, then I could kind of act as if I knew what I was talking about. So a few years ago, because I was a professor at UBC, I can go sit in on a course for nothing, I signed up to Audit Economics 101. And the first day I was going to go to class, I was pretty excited. And as I walked out the door, my wife said, Suzuki, for a change, why don't you try not saying anything for the whole class? I said, okay, I promise, I won't say anything. And so there was a very large class, and about halfway through the first lecture, the professor said, and now the next slide will show the economy. And it was really impressive. You know, arrows going back and forth, raw materials, extraction, process, manufacture. And the idea is, I guess, that if you know everything in the economy, then you can tweak it with a disincentive here that you don't want to do that, or with an incentive there, and you can keep the economy growing. I swore to my wife, I had no idea the arm was going up. And I said, excuse me, sir, in that diagram, where do you put the ozone layer? Where do you put the deep underground aquifers of fossil water? Where do you put topsoil or biodiversity? And I know there are some economists here, because you've got economists on your board. The answer was, those are externalities. Now, I knew the word externality, but I'd never heard it used in that way. But what it means is, they're not in the economy. Well, then you might as well be on Mars, because that economy's got nothing to do with the world that I live in. So it's not surprising then that Hazel Henderson says that conventional economics is a form of brain damage. If you externalize the world upon which you depend, then what kind of a system is that? Well, I think part of the problem is that to the economist, the best thing to hit the planet was us. We're so smart. We're so inventive. We're so productive that the economy is built on human productivity. And of course, there are no limits to human inventiveness and productivity. And so economists actually believe there's no limit to economics, the economy. The economy, not only do they believe that it can grow forever, which it cannot, but they think that it must.